Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent writing crime fiction inspired by actual FBI cases. In this episode, we get to speak to Dana Ridenour. Dana served over 20 years with the FBI, and she's interviewed about working drug investigations on the island of St. Croix, a resident agency out of the FBI San Juan office in Puerto Rico. She lets us know right away that it wasn't as exotic as it sounds. But the majority of her interview is about her undercover assignments in California, where she was tasked to infiltrate and build relationships with individuals associated with animal rights extremist groups. Her job was to gather intelligence about possible criminal activities and to see if she could find information about the location of activist fugitives. Dana explains to us that in order to be successful, deep undercover agents accept the fact that their job is to build relationships, to portray relationships. It's a fascinating interview, and I think you'll enjoy it. Now, just two very quick things before we get to the interview. First of all, to my new friend down under, I want to say g'day, Stuart Kelly. Stuart wrote me to let me know that he's enjoying the podcast and that he listens to it while looking out onto the Great Barrier Reef in North Queensland, Australia, in Cairns. Hi, Stuart. That's one thing that has me so excited. Not only that the podcast has developed such a great following, but that we have listeners from all over the world. So wherever you are out there, hello, and thanks for listening. The other thing I want to talk to you real quick is, if you are listening to this on Saturday, July 30th, or Sunday, July 31st, I just want to remind you it is the last 2 days for you to be able to get a free ebook copy of my new novel, Pay to Play. The novel itself won't be released until September 20th, but I'm looking for people to join my book launch team. To be on my book launch team, all you have to do is read the novel in advance. That's why you're getting it so early. And if you enjoy it, write an honest review and tell all of your friends and associates about it during the first few weeks that it's released. If you're interested in doing that, then go to jerrywilliams.com, sign up for my newsletter. There's a place to do so on the sidebar, and there's always that great pop-up. And on Monday, August the 1st, I will be sending out a notice to my entire newsletter list, letting them know how to access that free ebook. Again, Pay to Play is about a female FBI agent investigating corruption in the Philadelphia strip club industry. If you like a dark and gritty novel, there's profanity, there's sex, there's violence, none of it graphic or gratuitous. So if that's the kind of thing that you might be interested in and you would like to support me in the launch of my debut novel, then join my team and get a free copy of the ebook. The offer ends on Sunday, July 31st, 2016 at midnight. All right, that's all I'm going to say about being on my book launch team. Let's get on with the show. Hi, everyone. I want to welcome my guest, Dana Ridenour. Hi, Dana.
Hi, Jerry.
I am really excited to speak to you today. We've talked a lot about international terrorism. People know about and hear about domestic terrorism, and so I'm excited to talk to you today so we can learn a little bit more. But before we do that, could you tell me a little bit about yourself? You know, when you joined the FBI, why you joined the FBI?
Sure. You're going to laugh, but when I was a sophomore in high school, we took a band trip to Washington, D.C., and part of our tour of D.C. was a tour of the FBI headquarters. And so here I was, 15 years old, touring FBI headquarters, and I knew right then and there I was going to be an FBI agent. So all of my yearbooks have good luck in the FBI. Lo and behold, I did. I'm from Kentucky originally. So I started out at the University of Kentucky and then ended up transferring to Eastern Kentucky University because they had a really good criminal justice program. At the time, the Bureau was predominantly hiring lawyers and accountants. So I went to law school, graduated from Chase Law, and planned on going in the FBI right as I graduated in 92. Unfortunately, if you remember, the federal job freeze hit, and I didn't get into the Bureau until 1995. So in November of 1995, I entered the Bureau, entered the Academy.
Wow. So you're one of those people, again, who knew exactly what they wanted to do and had the Bureau in their sights.
I did. My dad was a police officer when I was growing up, too, so I kind of had law enforcement in my blood, I guess you could say.
I didn't even think about joining the FBI until I filled out the application. I was a juvenile probation officer. Someone said that the FBI was looking for women and minorities, and, I called the recruiter. It sounded good to me. I filled out the application, and 6 months later, I was at the Academy. But I'm glad that I made it a career.
Yeah, it was a phenomenal career. I was in for 20 years, a little over 20.
Okay, so what offices were you assigned to during your career?
Well, my first office was Mobile, Alabama. See, I arrived there in March 96, right out of the Academy. It was a wonderful first office. Had such a great time. It was number 8 on my list. So I'd never been to Alabama, but it looked like a great place to go. I wanted to stay in the South. I don't like snow and cold, so I was happy. I was there for 6 years. In April, I think, of 2002, I left. Decided to shake things up a little bit, and I had a buddy that said, hey, the San Juan division has some openings in St. Croix. And, me being me, decided why not. So I put in and ended up in the St. Croix resident agency. Spent 7 years on St. Croix.
Was it as exotic as it sounds?
Well, it's a whole different ball game to work someplace and vacation someplace. No, it actually was the wild, wild west. The violent crime was terrible. The drugs were terrible. It was a very difficult place to work. It was considered a hardship duty post, and anything that's considered a hardship duty post is called that for a reason. It wasn't all sunshine and laying on the beach. There was a lot of that, but there was also a lot of really hard work. I worked HIDA, which is the high-intensity drug trafficking area. I was on the task force with DEA, so we put in a lot of hours. Let's see, in 2003, I started getting involved in the Undercover program. So I ended up, while I was assigned to the San Juan division, I ended up in California doing long-term domestic terrorism case, which I guess we'll probably talk about in a bit. And so I was in California doing that, and I came back after the case was over. I came back to San Juan. And then a couple of years later, there was another long-term undercover domestic terrorism case out of Los Angeles that since I had worked the one in Northern California, they asked if I would come to Los Angeles. So in 2009, I transferred to LA division, and I was there from 2009 to 2013. And then in 2013, I ended up being transferred to the Tampa division, the Orlando resident agency, and I was there till I retired April this year. I think one of the great things about the FBI is that you can move around the country, you can do different assignments. So I wanted different experiences. So that's why I left Mobile. It definitely wasn't because I was unhappy, because that was the greatest field division ever. So when I took the transfer and went to San Juan to St. Croix, it was just because I wanted something different. I wanted to kind of shake up my career a bit. But I never went the management track. I was considered what we call the brick agent. I worked the GS-13 when I retired. I never went up the management chain. I didn't want to be a supervisor. I didn't want to be a special agent in charge. I just wanted to be a special agent. I wanted to work cases, hit the ground, do all the stuff that I'd always dreamed about doing. And I always felt like if I did the management track, that would take me off the street, and I never wanted to be off the street.
When you talk about being a supervisor versus not being a supervisor, is when you're a case agent, you are a supervisor. You're supervising your case. You're making decisions as far as manpower, resources that you need. You're doing all of that for your own case. You're running the show.
You are, and especially some of the offices I've been, Mobile was the second smallest field division, so, basically you had to figure out resources from what little bit you had. And then when I was in St. Croix, we were a resident agency out of a resident agency. So we had no supervisor. We had no support staff. We were completely on our own. And you have to kind of roll with the punches and figure out things for yourself and figure out how to get resources. it's all kind of part of the fun of being a case agent, I guess.
Right, and that's what the difference is. So, when people outside the FBI hear that someone was not a supervisor, I like to make it very clear to them that doesn't mean that you didn't use every single day management skills.
Right, definitely.
All right, so earlier you said that, you kind of fell into undercover. How does one do that? What made you raise your hand and decide that you wanted to work undercover?
Well, it probably came about, my first undercover, I wasn't even certified yet. I was just a female agent working drugs in Mobile. It was like 1999. And DEA did not have a female undercover agent, and they needed a female for a case. They had a medical doctor who was trading prescriptions for sex, so they wanted to do an undercover operation. They didn't have any females. They came to the FBI and said, can we borrow a female? And I was the only female in the office. So my supervisor said, you want to give this a try? And I said, yeah. And it was really a successful case. I had a few meetings with the doctor. It was successful. He was convicted and he got a 2-year prison term for trading prescriptions for sex. And it was a great experience, but it kind of gave me that adrenaline rush. And so that's when I first started thinking, hey, maybe I could do undercover work. Maybe this is something I'll think about. But I wanted to get a little bit more time under my belt. So I didn't actually apply for the program until 2003. And
right, so when you did this thing with DEA, you would have been in for about 4 years.
Right. So I didn't feel like I had enough street experience, and I didn't feel like I had enough just being an agent. I wanted to get my chops a little bit more working cases before I decided to kind of specialize. So went back to just working drug cases, but in the back of my mind, I knew that I liked the undercover work, and I thought down the road this is something I would like to do.
All right. Well, the listeners will be very upset with me if I don't ask you what happened with this doctor. Did he try to proposition you? Did you get that recorded, on tape? What exactly did you have to do in that particular undercover role?
I did. I wore a wire. It was the first time I'd ever worn a wire, so that was an interesting experience. I had a backup team. I actually would meet the doctor in public places. I would meet him in parking lots, things like that, for my protection. And I could actually see my backup car, in my rearview mirror. I knew I was covered. I knew I was safe. And I would meet him, and basically we would discuss what I would do to him for these prescriptions. And he would just sit there with his prescription pad and write me prescriptions all day long, knowing that I was going to give him sexual favors for it later at his beach house. Well, obviously, we didn't let it get to that point.
Okay.
So everything was recorded. Then I also made a series of telephone calls to him doing the same thing where he was getting antsy because he was giving me prescriptions and he wasn't getting paid for his prescriptions. So we did telephone calls, we did face-to-face meets, and then after DEA felt like they had enough evidence to convict him, the case was taken down.
And did you have to testify in court, or did he go ahead and plea?
He ended up pleading, went all the way up to trial a week or so before trial, and then he ended up pleading.
And so that was the kind of thing that you liked, that adrenaline. You said that you knew that was something that you wanted to do.
Yes.
So do you think there's like a little bit of an actress in you?
Yeah, I think a little bit, maybe.
Well, we'll talk about this a little bit later at the end, but you are an author, you are a storyteller, and so I would think that that's part of the intrigue of being undercover also. Would you agree?
I would agree, yes. It brings out the whole creative side, too, because once again, you're on your own, and you have to figure out the best way to approach a case. You have to figure out your part, your role, your legacy, your legend. I mean, it's kind of up to you to make up your past, and it has to be believable. And so it was kind of a creative side comes out with that.
It sounds like it. Very interesting. So take us to your first long-term undercover role. Did you have to go through the undercover training for that one?
Yes, I did.
Well, tell us what you can. I know there are probably some trade craft or trade secrets and that, you can't divulge, but tell us what you can about that undercover training.
Okay. Well, The FBI, unlike other departments and other agencies, require certified undercover agents to go through the school. With the FBI, we take a lot of care in making sure the person's psychologically ready for it, emotionally ready for working undercover, and basically physically too. So we go through a 2-week course. It's extreme. It's very intense. A lot of sleep deprivation, I can say that. And they just make sure they put you through the whole ringer. It's a lot of role play activities where they bring in role players, so it's scenario after scenario after scenario. And they want to make sure you can think on your feet, you can talk your way out of things, because if you're working undercover, your only weapon is usually your mouth. So you got to be able to talk. You got to be able to talk fast and think fast and get out of situations. And so basically that's what the school is. The school is grueling. I'd never been able to sleep on a plane before until the end of that school. And when I was flying back to the Virgin Islands, I was sound asleep from the moment those wheels left the ground until I landed. I was wrung out and exhausted after the school.
Wow, that just tells you how intensive it was.
It was. I always said it was the best experience and the worst experience all rolled up into one.
Now, we have talked before, on the podcast to other agents who worked undercover early, much earlier, like in the 80s and the early 90s, when there was not an undercover training program, and they did long term, and they were just kind of thrust into it. And they talk about the emotional toll that took. So this program, I take it, that they established, was established out of need.
It was. I think after the Donnie Brasco years where Joe Pistone was under and they didn't have any sort of safety net, so to speak, and they didn't have any psychological counseling and a safeguard to safeguard the mental well-being of undercover agents. I think that's when the Bureau realized, hey, we need a program. And the safeguarding unit was established, and they started doing a little bit more of the psychological aspects of the job. And when you're actively working undercover, every 6 months you get pulled back for assessment. And you go through a series of testing and a couple of different interviews with a counselor and with undercover agents who have worked kind of long-term stuff too. And people talk to you and just assess, are you doing okay? How's your mental stability? Are you lonely? Just to make sure you're not doing anything crazy. You're not into using drugs. You're not relying on alcohol. Because the loneliness can take a toll. It can take a huge toll on you when you're out there by yourself and you feel like you really have no tether to the real world.
Yeah, I can imagine. Especially if you're in a world that is not your own. Danger. Maybe if you're doing an undercover drug or some type of violent, infiltrating some type of violent group. I mean, you're on your own, knowing that if you're caught, they're suspicious that, your life could be in danger. That's a lot of mental pressure on a person.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
All right. So let's talk about domestic terrorism. Can you explain to everyone what domestic terrorism is, as opposed to, we hear about terrorism and Al-Qaeda and ISIS. What is domestic terrorism?
Well, I guess kind of the best way to describe it is any acts that's dangerous to human lives that's in violation of a criminal law. Usually it's intended to intimidate or coerce like a civilian population or possibly to influence the policy or change in a government is kind of the broad definition. With domestic terrorism, it can range from anything from the eco-terrorist to the Unabomber, Timothy McVeigh, even the Orlando nightclub shooting just here recently. So domestic terrorism it can run kind of a broad gamut of areas. People kind of think domestic terrorism isn't as important as international, that we have to be thinking about international, when in fact domestic terrorism is just as important, if not so more so than international, because domestic terrorists are living right here among us. I mean, they're your neighbor. and we don't know until they've done something heinous, like in Orlando. Look at all the lives lost in Oklahoma City. So that's kind of domestic terrorism in a nutshell, but with me, what my experience centered around what they call eco-terrorism. And that's the activists, where activists are engaged in different types of direct action against persons or organizations that they perceive as harming either animals or the environment. And that can be anything from, laboratories doing animal testing to factory farms, like the ski resorts up in Vail they thought were, being built and cutting into the natural environment. So that was where all of my domestic terrorism undercover experiences were, dealing with basically the Earth Liberation Front and the Animal Liberation Front.
All right. So now you explained to us that they did some type of act, terrorist act for these two groups. Can you give us an example of something that they did that was a violent act against, whatever their targets were?
Yeah, most of the time, arson. Arson is one of the big ways that they go after, especially organizations. I know in San Diego, there was an apartment complex that was burned to the ground, millions of dollars worth of damage. Out in Vail with the ski resorts, that was arson as well. Sometimes they'll resort to just animal liberations, like you'll see the minks where they'll sneak out and they'll release all the minks to try to hurt a mink farmer to the point that they can't afford to keep the business going. Sometimes it's property damage, like with the fur stores. They'll go in and throw the red paint, they'll glue the locks, they'll bust the windows, and sometimes resort in arson in those too. But for the big cases, it's usually where the FBI is involved. It's usually a case of arson. They've gone after the SUV dealerships where they've blown up a bunch of vehicles. And so usually that's kind of their mode of operation is arson.
All right. So tell us a little bit more. If we can go a little deeper and spend the rest of our time talking about your actual undercover adventures infiltrating one of these groups. That's what you did, wasn't it?
Yes. I was really lucky. The FBI doesn't have a lot of long-term, what they call deep cover cases, to where you work 24/7. You go, you have your whole set of new identification. And so I was lucky enough to actually do two of those in my career that were long-term. The first one I did up in Northern California, right around the Sacramento area. The case was actually out of Sacramento. And that one, I was up there probably close to 3 years, working, infiltrating, reporting back. Initially, when I was kind of put into these situations, it was to gather intel. We wanted to know what was going to happen, where it was going to happen before it happened. If they were going to bomb a building, burn something down, risk human life, the FBI wanted to know about it before it happened. So that was kind of my role. I was the eyes and the ears. I infiltrated the group, went to meetings, volunteered, hung out, and I spent basically every waking minute with the targets who were doing the bad stuff, just trying to stay one step ahead of them, so to speak. I was also kind of listening and trying to find fugitives. At the time, the fugitive from the San Diego fire was at large. So I was in there to try to find out if I could figure out where he was hiding and pass on any information to my contact agent in the Bureau. So that was my job the first time. And I was lucky enough to get right in with the group immediately, fit in well. I was complete vegan because the people, the activists, are normally vegan. Well, they just about 99% of them are.
And were you vegan before you took on this role?
I was not. I didn't know what a vegan was before I took on the role. So that was a whole different, I had to learn how to eat, how to dress. My life was completely turned upside down. I became a vegan, and being vegan means you don't take on any animal product at all. You don't eat any meat. You don't wear leather. You don't use cosmetics that were tested on animals. You don't use cleaning products that were tested on animals. You have to know every single product in your apartment. You have to know that it's cruelty-free. That takes a lot of research when that's not your lifestyle before. It became my lifestyle quickly. but I had to learn to eat. I had to learn how to get proper nutrition, how to make sure I was getting the right amount of protein. So it was fun, but it was a lot of work to just get ready. I started about a year before I ever infiltrated, getting ready for the case. I became a vegan. I started not wearing leather. I started trying to figure out where do you buy shoes that aren't leather. All that stuff that I'd never done before. So about a year before I actually went undercover, I started living the life, at least to the best of my abilities. And then when I infiltrated, it wasn't so much of a shock.
So when you say you were getting ready, were you working in the Sacramento office at the time, or were you just flying in to meet with the case agent to learn and to start preparing to go undercover in the case?
I was flying in. I was still working my drug cases down in the Virgin Islands, but I would fly in and work at the case agent, get my alias established, make sure everything, because I had to have credit cards in my alias. I had to have different kinds of ID in my alias. I had to start establishing that person. And the organization that you were working against, do they now know that you had infiltrated the group, and do they now know who you are? Yes. Unfortunately, they do.
Okay. When you say unfortunately, I got to ask you, why you say that.
Well, let's see. Okay. So I worked the first undercover, and then after that was a pretty successful run. Nobody went to jail because it was pretty much intel only. The second case is where it gets a little messed up. The second case, I was asked if I would come to Los Angeles, and it was the same type thing. It was the Animal Liberation Front. I was working in the Virgin Islands. I had just started dating a man there, another agent, and honestly, I didn't want to go because, I was getting to that point in my life where I was looking for a real relationship, and when you're working undercover, you can't have that. You can't have a real relationship. The interesting thing about that case is it called for two undercover employees, two undercover agents. My boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, so it does have a good ending. My boyfriend was an undercover agent as well. So we pitched it to the FBI, how about a couple playing a couple? And, most of the people thought it was a great idea. There were some people that said this is horrible, you're going to be 24/7, this is going to be the demise of your relationship. But ultimately they said, okay, go. So my boyfriend and I went to Los Angeles and started working the second big case. There were some problems. The first case, it was a Group 1 operation. It was funded out of headquarters. It had been up a couple of years. It was intel only to begin with. There was kind of a change in thought that said, well, maybe we need to go criminal. They decided to change this over to a criminal case. They wanted arrests, and they wanted them within 6 months. Well, it was a little bit of an odd position because here I am as an undercover agent, not pushing myself to do the criminal activity for 2 years, and then suddenly the FBI says, no, we want arrest. So then you have to kind of switch gears, and then you start pressing, well, let's do criminal activity. It put us in a very strange position, and I think we started kind of getting some red flags. And then that case...
When you say red flags, you mean the group were starting to look at you strangely or starting to question you?
They were starting to question us because here we were changing, all of a sudden we're changing our tactics. You never wanted to do this before, and now you're wanting to do it. But we sort of got over that hurdle. In fact, we got over to the point that they invited us to go overseas with them. So we actually went with our targets, 3 of our targets. We flew to Ireland, and then we ended up in the Netherlands for basically a terrorist training camp. We went to we stayed in an anarchist camp in a tent. We were there for about 10 days, and we learned bomb making, recon. We learned it was a terrorist camp, so we learned how to evade cameras and what equipment to use and what equipment not to use that can be traced. And so we traveled with them, so we were still in their good graces. But when we came back, headquarters decided to close down the Group 1 operation.
Why would they do that? I mean, it sounded like they were getting unbelievable information, unbelievable intel.
we thought the same thing, and that's what the case agent tried to explain to them. It's like, look, these two undercovers have just traveled to two different countries with these people, and we were told by the targets that they wanted us to participate in criminal activity. That, not in those words, but that's what we were told. We were led to believe they were going to be calling on us to do criminal activity with them. So we kind of gotten over the hurdle of, being kind of passive, and now we're more aggressive. And I think they were buying into everything, and it was going well. Well, headquarters, they wanted the money spent elsewhere. They closed the case. So there we sat in L.A. with a closed case, and we couldn't have any contact with these targets anymore, because once the case is done, we have no authority to contact them. So the Los Angeles division, they didn't feel too comfortable about that, having these people in their backyards and headquarters closing the case. So they said, we're going to do a Group 2 operation. And usually it's always the opposite. You start out small and you go big. And in this case, we went big and then we got small. So they wanted to have this case reopened. Well, I know this is going to shock you, but the FBI has a lot of paperwork.
What? Really?
And a lot of bureaucracy. So long story short, it took them 6 months to get the Group 2 operation all so we could make contact with these people again. Well, that was a huge red flag. We've disappeared for 6 months and suddenly we're back. And these people are very intelligent. These are not dumb people. They're college educated. This was a
Where did you tell them you were?
Yeah,
where did you tell them you had been?
We told them that my mother had been sick in Kentucky and that we went back to Kentucky. We were taking care of my parents and, that we had family obligations, but they did not buy that at all. It was totally, and then to make matters worse, during this period of time, an activist lawyer had filed the Freedom of Information Act for a couple of hundred activists. Anybody that wanted it, he filed it for them. So those Freedom of Information Act packets were coming back to these activists. And the activist in Northern California that had worked, the case had been closed, she finds out, she gets her stuff. And although my name really wasn't in it, there was no way she put two and two together. She said the only person that knew all this was this one female that I used to deal with. I know exactly who she is. She's an informant, a snitch, or a cop. She's got to be one of the three. And so she called down to California, to LA, because they're all friends. It's a big group. It's a network. She calls down to the people in LA and says, hey, you guys have got a snitch amongst you. And then that's when it kind of got ugly. That's when the pictures went out on the internet and they confronted us. And it was an ugly situation, very ugly.
What do you mean the pictures went out on the internet?
The activist put the pictures of myself and my husband out and splashed it all through the activist community, basically saying that something's not right. We think they're working for the police. Be aware of these people. Know who you're dealing with. Don't talk to them. I didn't feel like we were in any physical danger, but they were definitely going to the best of their ability to make sure that nobody would have any contact with us.
Wow. When was the first time you found out about this? Did you see the pictures yourself, or did somebody tell you about it?
Somebody told me about it, another activist who didn't believe, they believed us. It was kind of a warring group. The activism is very splintered, though. Some of them really want to do the direct action and believe in breaking the law, and the other side of them are a little more welfarist. They want to change the laws. So there's a lot of splintered groups, and it's just a fractured group of activists. So you always have fighting amongst the group. So the one half that didn't believe them came to us and said, hey, they just put your picture all over the place. They say you're a snitch, and I don't believe them, but I wanted you to know, and here it is. And that's how we found out.
Wow. Now, what was your cover? I mean, who were you and your husband, boyfriend at the time, supposed to be?
Well, we managed a store. We had a store, and we worked during the day, and we were just supporting the activists with our time, our money, whatever else they needed.
You don't have to, but can you tell us a little bit more what the store sold?
Well, I can't tell you. It is sold like vegan goods, things that they would be interested in. Canvas shoes, canvas bags, shirts, a lot of activist stuff like activist T-shirts, things like that.
Very smart, because that way that really ingratiates you into the community and also gives you a reason to have contact with the very people that you're trying to get to know and learn more about.
Correct, yes. Between the Freedom of Information Act, the time period between the first case going down, the second case coming up, all the red flags, they just, at that point, they were convinced, and they just felt like that we were either working for the police or we were the police at that point.
And although you said there was nothing physical danger, did you ever get into any confrontations, any verbal arguments or confrontations with people?
Yes. In fact, we were approached. It was a conference, actually, out in Washington, D.C., and a bunch of them basically approached us and said, "You're not welcome here." And it was a situation where you either leave or it was going to get ugly. It was going to turn physical. And we didn't want that. We didn't want to get into some slugfest in the middle of a conference. It would have been embarrassing, but somebody would have got hurt, and there was no sense. At that point in time, it was just smarter to pull out, call the contact agent, get out of there before things got uglier. It did mean, though, unfortunately, that we had to move. The Bureau would not allow us to stay in the Los Angeles area, which was a little bit of a tragedy for me because I had kind of reached the pinnacle of my undercover work. I was working with an undercover group there. I was extremely happy. I loved the work that I was doing, and I didn't want to leave LA, but they considered our safety a little more important than my happiness at work. So they did a safety transfer. It was an undercover transfer, and nothing happens overnight in the Bureau unless you don't want it to, and it pretty much happened, and we ended up Florida bound. They just wanted us on the other side of the country.
Wow. That is absolutely fascinating, because you never think about, I've done a number of interviews with Undercover, and they've always worked out perfectly. But, this is a situation where there were a number of hiccups. Let me ask you this. Was it ever confirmed? Was there ever a time when, was it ever made known for sure that you and your boyfriend, husband, were FBI agents?
It wasn't through the Bureau. How it finally came out that they confirmed everything was after I retired, my book came out in April. Right after my book came out, the Huffington Post did an interview, did like a little blog report on me and my book. And the Animal Liberation Front, well, actually it was NALPO, which is the North American Animal Press Office. And they handle all the ALF actions, like they publicize it and get it out to where people know, hey, this was bombed because of Animal Liberation Front. They're press people. They NALPO got a hold of it and read it, and then, of course, my picture was there. It was all confirmed at that point. So, of course, they splashed me all over the NALPO website that, this person's an FBI agent. So it was pretty much confirmed at that point, thanks to the Huffington Post article.
Which was a good thing and a bad thing. As they say, any publicity is, whether negative or positive, is, good publicity. So, more people got to learn about your book. It was really funny because I know you wrote a book, and we're going to talk about that right now. But the whole time you're telling the story, I'm thinking, this sounds like a book. And so basically, yes. is your book about this? Did you fictionalize a lot of the actual things that happened to you in real life for your fictional characters?
I did, actually. I didn't want to write the run-of-the-mill FBI novel. I wanted to use my personal experiences as an undercover agent, kind of to capture that psychological toll that undercover work has on an agent. So when I sit down to write, the book is fiction, but of course it's based on a young, idealistic FBI agent who goes deep undercover to befriend and to infiltrate a dangerous group of domestic terrorists. So the first book does deal with the Animal Liberation Front.
All right, before we go 1 minute further, tell us the name of the book.
Behind the Mask.
Okay, and give us your elevator pitch. Tell us a little bit more about what the book's about.
Okay. Well, the female FBI agent goes deep undercover to infiltrate a dangerous group of terrorists. Events spiral out of control, and she begins to realize, possibly a little too late, that her sworn duty may require her to betray the surprisingly deep friendship that she's formed with the people who've let her into their secretive world. Because the people that I was in contact with, for the most part, it's a little bit different when you're working a drug case or a mob case. The people are just bad. I mean, you don't like these people. They're hurting people. But the Animal Liberation Front people, the activists, for the majority of the activists are good people. They care about animals. They care about the environment. They're college educated. They're good people. There's a small number of them that go over the top, that resort to direct action and resort to arson and breaking the law and hurting people. And, of course, obviously that's the people I'm after as an FBI agent. But you meet a lot of really nice people along the way that kind of get roped into this stuff, too. So that's kind of the premise of the book. And you build relationships to betray relationships, and that's the whole premise of the book.
Wow. And I would imagine, again, that even though you weren't targeting, the people, the low-level activists or the anti-violent activists, they feel just as much betrayed when they learn who you really are because you lied to them. And you lied to them for a good reason, it's part of the job, and they base their relationships, with you on falsehoods.
Exactly. I mean, when you're undercover full-time like that, you lie to everybody. You're lying to your hairdresser. You're lying to your dog walker. Nobody knows your true identity. And the peripheral people, it's the same thing. They might not be the criminals, but you're building real relationships with these people, and they're going to feel betrayed because, well, ultimately you betray them. That's the whole nature of undercover work.
And how do you deal with that? I mean, how do you, as an undercover agent, deal with that? Because I take it that some of these, the feelings that you have for some of these people are genuine. You consider them friends. You're hanging out with them for, like you said, some of these undercover roles you did were 2 to 3 years. So you've developed strong relationships with people that at the end are going to fall apart when they discover who you really are, or you just walk away and disappear. Right.
Well, I always say, too, I think especially with long-term cases where you're under multiple years, that when at the end of the case, you come out changed. You lose a little bit of yourself, I think, with every long-term case. I just think that that's just what happens. It takes a psychological impact on you. That's kind of what I wanted to get to with the novel, is the impact that it has on the agent. And you just have to learn to deal with it. You walk away. Obviously, you have to walk away. You can't make contact with these people anymore because the FBI won't let you. And no matter how much you like somebody and you want to go back and contact them, you can't. It's prohibited. So you have to find a way to deal with it, whether it's jump into your next case, find a hobby, or just walk away. That's all you can do.
Now that they know who you really are, especially now that the book is out and they can read it and they can see your photo, has anybody tried to contact you?
No, not. They put stuff on the website, kind of where I was living and things like that. But at this point, nobody has tried to contact me.
What would you do if they did?
Well, it would depend on how they were contacting me. If they were contacting me just to ask questions and be nice and or just to air grievances, I don't have any problems talking with any of those people. I really don't. If they show up on my doorstep, then we got a problem. And if they're going to show up on my doorstep, they better come right, because my husband and I are both former agents. We can defend ourselves if we have to. I would hope that it would never come to that, though. I think these people honestly have better things to do and more important fish to fry than deal with a retired agent that kind of made their life miserable for a while.
Very interesting. And I think it's given everyone an opportunity to really get an understanding of what it's like to be undercover. You did work in the undercover unit also in Los Angeles. Didn't you mention that to me before?
Yes, I did.
And so you would help other undercover agents in their roles? Tell me a little bit more about that.
That's exactly what we do. The group that I worked with, we would support other undercover cases that were going on. So if, say, a case needed a car, I would get the car registered, so it wasn't registered to the FBI, obviously. I'd make sure that they had whatever they needed. If they needed telephones, if they needed, undercover motorcycle, whatever they needed, they would come to my group and they would say, can you help me get this? Can we do this? Can we do that? They needed to set up a corporation. We would help them do that. And it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it because the only thing better than working the undercover yourself is helping other people be successful in undercover operations. So it was rewarding, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working with the other undercovers. I learned a lot from the older undercovers, and I felt like I taught some of the younger undercovers the things that mistakes I've made. Some of the best learning, I think, is mistakes you've made, and I'd give them the benefit of that. Lord knows I've made a lot of mistakes over the years, so, if I can teach somebody from my mistakes and keep them from doing something dumb, well, that made me feel good at the end of the day.
Great. Now, when you give all of that information, new identification and registration, all that, that's called backstopping, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Just want to give out that technical term. Very good. Now, when did you retire, and what are you doing now?
I retired this April 6, 2016. I retired the day after my 50th birthday, so when I was eligible. And I am writing full-time. I'm working on my second novel. The first novel, of course, is out. Behind the Mask is out. I'm working on the second novel, which I'm hoping to have out 2017. My website is just danaridenour.net. It's not .net, and they can go to my website, and I keep a blog there, and I just kind of keep everybody apprised of what's happening with the first book and how the second book's coming along.
And the second book is also going to be about a female FBI agent working undercover?
It is. I had so much material, I couldn't shove it all into one. So what I've decided to do is do a series of FBI books. So my female character, Alexi Montgomery from the first book, is actually taking on a second undercover case. The first one was set all in California. The second set is set in the South. I set it in South Carolina, which is where I'm living now. So it has a different feel. It has a whole different kind of Southern feel to it. So it's been a lot of fun to write. I'm enjoying it.
Well, I'm so glad I had an opportunity to talk to you, to meet you. I mean, we're kind of doing the same thing, taking the work that we did in the FBI in our career and fictionalizing it to give people, a little taste of what it's really like, not just from, what they read in the paper, but the emotional, personal character side of it. So I wish you luck. And
well, thank you.
I can't wait to dig into my copy of Behind the Mask. All right, so we have been talking for a while. It's been fascinating. Is there anything that I haven't asked you or anything that you want to say that kind of sums up your career, especially working undercover?
I just feel like the FBI has been a wonderful career, and if there's people out there that are young and thinking about which way do I want to go with life, I think, check into the Bureau. You don't have to be a gun-toting special agent. We have all kinds of careers, analysts. Just there's tons of careers out there. I think if you're thinking about a career in the Bureau, go into the field office or get online and check out, see what kind of jobs the FBI has that might interest you. I was fortunate enough to go through my last year 2 different times. I took 2 different classes through the FBI Academy from start to finish as a class counselor, and I was fortunate enough to meet the next generation of FBI agents, the young analysts and the young agents that have taken my spot, your spot, and they're out there now. And it's a great career. It's a wonderful time to get into federal law enforcement, and I wouldn't change or trade any of it. There were ups and downs. There were days I was pulling my hair out. There was days I wanted to quit. There was days where I didn't have a nice word to say about the FBI. But I look back now after 20 years, and I think, what a great ride.
And that's the end of the interview. As always, back at jerrywilliams.com, you'll find photos of Dana. There'll be links to articles about animal rights extremists and eco-terrorism. There's an overview from the FBI's website, and there is a direct link to her book, Beyond the Mask. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't hesitate to share it with your friends and family. Now, this is the part of the show where I recommend crime fiction, so you won't be surprised if my recommendation for today is, ta-da, Behind the Mask by Dana Ridenour. I read the book. Matter of fact, I just finished reading it a few hours ago, and it was fantastic. It was really funny because I read the book after interviewing her, so I could see on every page where she took her real-life experience and weaved it into the story. It is not a story of her career, but she takes what she learned during her career, working undercover, infiltrating animal rights groups, and all of that information is expertly inserted into the story. Great job, Dana. I'm very glad that I met you. It looks like we're trying to do kind of the same thing, bring something fresh and new to stories about the FBI with some authenticity and some authority about really what happens in the FBI and what it's like to be an agent. This episode was sponsored by FBIRetired.com, the only online directory made available to the general public featuring retired FBI agents and analysts interested in showcasing their skills to secure business opportunities. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come back again next week for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.